once I press start, we'll be live.
Okay.
I'm sure some people are still finding in audience files.
All right, are we on? Okay. Well, welcome everybody. It's my pleasure to welcome you to Meridians, literally our Meridians conference room. My name is Janetta Candelario. I am the editor, and I am a professor here at Smith College, where the journal is housed, of sociology, Latin American Latino studies, and the study of women and gender. And joining me today is our new editorial assistant, Megan Baptiste.
Hi everyone, my name is Megan Baptiste. As Janetta said, I am the new editorial assistant here at Meridians. I'm very happy to be here. I am coming from Northampton. I am a poet, and I also work with Beloved Black Girl. And I'm just happy to be here.
This is actually Megan's first month anniversary, so join me in
welcoming her.
I'm really happy that Megan's with us today. So, as I mentioned, we are here today to celebrate volume 19 of Meridians. But before we do that, I'd like us to take a moment to acknowledge the land on which Meridians stands, which is Nonotuck land. I'd also like to acknowledge our neighboring indigenous nations, the Nipmuc and the Wampanoag to the east, the Mohegan and the Pequot to the south, the Mohican to the west, and the Abenaki to the north. In that same spirit, before we begin our conversation, I'd like us all to just take a moment to reflect upon and to honor the lives that we have lost this year, over 240,000 to COVID-19, as well as those who were murdered at the hands of the police and other actors in the United States, and those who have come before us and paved this moment so that we may be here to speak. Just take one moment, please. Thank you. May we honor the ancestors for the work that we do. And in that spirit, I'd like to make a quick announcement to remind you, in case you have forgotten or don't already know, that we opened our Elizabeth Alexander Creative Writing Award on October 15th of this year. And we will be accepting submissions for the Creative Writing Award until December 31st. Please do share the announcements of the award broadly among all your networks. It is in honor of Elizabeth Alexander's work, both here at Smith College, where she helped to establish the Poetry Center and was one of the founding members of the Meridians Editorial Advisory Board, plus the work that she has gone on to do as a nationally and internationally acclaimed poet, and of course now at the Mellon Foundation, where she supports creative writing and social justice work in all its forms. It's my tremendous pleasure to be joined today by not all, but many, in fact, most of the contributors to volume 19 of Meridians. And we'll begin by asking everyone who is here today to tell us who you are and where you are and what you do where you are. We can begin with Rachel. Please remember to unmute yourselves, by the way. Rachel, would you please get us started? So TJ, would you mind? Unmute, please.
Yep, sure. I'm TJ Boisseau. I'm Associate Professor of Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies at Purdue University. That's in West Lafayette, Indiana, but I am not in West Lafayette in Indiana. I'm happy to say, even though it's for a pretty terrible reason, I'm working remotely this semester and I believe all year from my home base, which is in Damariscotta, Maine, on the coast of Maine. It's a beautiful place to be and very COVID-free, really. My essay appears as the second article in issue 1 of volume 19. It's entitled Coming of Age with Anne Moody, Looking Within and Without for the Origins of Black Women's Activism in the Civil Rights Movement. And I want to thank you for having me.
Khanum?
Hi there, I am Khanum Sheikh, and I am, what am I? Where am I? I'm not sure. I am an associate professor of gender and women's studies in California State University in Los Angeles, in Northridge, which is just slightly north of Los Angeles. And I am here speaking to you from Los Angeles, where I've been I think most of my life, yeah. And my co-author, Azza Basruddin, unfortunately, also, like me, made a mistake and thought that it was 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And so kind of messed up, even though we were both excited to be here. And we co-authored this piece called it's essay in volume 19, number 1. It's called The Contours of Speaking Out, Gender, State Security, and Muslim Women's Empowerment. And it's sort of a local LA-based piece. And I'm excited to be here. I'm so glad you hosted this.
Thank you. Cali, I believe you're next.
Yes, I'm Cali Swim Fox. I am a undergraduate senior at Smith College, and I was an intern with Meridians for my first 2 years at Smith, and I've been a research assistant with Professor Candelario. And I wrote the introductory note to the piece Cartini Day in issue 19.1, and I'm currently in Cleveland Heights, Ohio.
Pratika, I believe you're next.
Thanks. I'm Prithika Rajgaria. I am the contributing artist for issue 19.1 for the cover art. I've never been, well, that's a lie. I've never been in an academic journal before, but 10 plus years ago, I was in like a chemistry journal, but that's a story for a different lifetime. I'm now a visual artist, and I'm here in Houston, Texas, and it's 85 degrees.
Thank you. I think Leanne is next. Mute.
I've been doing this for months and just can't handle it today. Hello, my name is Leanne Francis. I'm an associate professor of women's gender and sexuality studies and African American studies at the College of New Jersey, which is in New Jersey. And my article is in volume 19, issue number 2. It's titled, the main title is Playing the Lady Sambo, Poor Black Women's Legal Strategies in the Post-Civil War South's Civil Courts. I'm in Lambertville, New Jersey, where it's not 85 degrees. And I just got to tell you that my 6-year-old twins are here too. You're probably going to see them. Just letting you know. Nice to be here.
Thank you, Leanne. Vanessa.
Hi, everyone. My name is Vanessa Rosa. I live in South Hadley, Massachusetts. I teach at Mount Holyoke College, also in South Hadley. I use she, her pronouns. My piece is in number 2, and it's called Mi Casa is Not Su Casa, a research reflection, and it's written in the spirit of Latina feminist testimonio. It's a piece about my grandmother coming to the United States from Puerto Rico, and her kind of work as a public housing tenant activist. Thank you.
Thank you. Maria, would you introduce yourself next, please? Did we lose Maria? There's Maria Vasquez.
Hello, everybody. My name is Maria Vasquez Colina. My co-authors could not be here today. They are presenting at a conference and in classes, but my co-authors are Sabrina Sembiantes, Cristobal Salinas, Andres Ramirez, and myself, and Yamile Silva. The title of our publication is Using Testimonials to Uncover Privilege and Prejudice in Experiences for faculty members with foreign English accents in higher education. It's going to be in volume 19, issue 2. I'm currently in South Florida, Boca Raton, South Florida, I'm originally from Peru, but I'm in South Florida, and today it's about temperature. It's a bit cool for us and very windy. We are 70 degrees and people are wearing sweaters here. Glad to be here today with you.
Thank you. Shauna.
Hi, I'm Shauna Buhan, and I'm a graduate student in the MFA program at UMass for Puerto a candidate for the graduate certificate in feminist studies there, and I teach in the writing program. My piece, A Language Outside, appears in volume 19, issue 2, and I'm currently in Northampton, Massachusetts. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Laura.
Hi everyone. I'm Laura Perin. I'm an associate professor in the Department of English and Comparative Literature and the program in Latina and Latino Studies at UNC Chapel Hill. My article appears in volume 19, issue 2, and it's titled Not No Rapunzel, The House on Mango Streets Revised Ever After.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. Lucia.
Hi, everybody. It's first of all great to see faces that I know. Hola, and thank you, Gineta, for organizing this. I'm Lucia Suarez, and I'm an associate professor of Spanish and Latina OX studies at Iowa State University. I'm also the director of the Latino Studies program. That's the official title. I'm here in the capacity of translator. I had the privilege of translating a piece hot from Cuba called Petition for a Comprehensive Law Against Gender-Based Violence in Cuba. Thanks. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Maddie. Oh, Rachel, do you want to introduce yourself since you're at the top?
Yes, I'm so sorry. Of course, my Zoom decided to cause problems the minute you called on me. So my name is Rachel Williams. I'm an associate professor of gender, women's, and sexuality studies at the University of Iowa. I'm also the area head of painting and drawing and the faculty ombudsperson. And my piece is called Elegy for Mary Turner. And I'm very excited to be here. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Marie.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Marie Cruz Soto. I'm a clinical associate professor at the Gallatin School of Individualized Study at New York University, NYU. And I wrote the article, The Making of Viequenses, Militarized Colonialism and Reproductive Rights. And it appears in the second issue of volume 19. And today I'm joining you from Vieques, Puerto Rico, which is the island that I write about in the article.
Beautiful. Thank you. And finally, but not least, certainly, Christy.
Thanks so much. My name is Christy Suarez. I'm an assistant professor of women and gender studies at the University of Colorado, Boulder, talking today from Boulder, Colorado. The article that I wrote, which appears in volume 2, is entitled Dominican Futurism, the Speculative Use of Negative Aesthetics in the Work of Rita Indiana. Glad to be here today.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us. So can we pull up the cover? Yeah. The first question we're going to ask is for Pritika, who is our cover artist. This is the beautiful cover that Pritika shared her art with us for. And the question I had for you is, could you tell us about what inspired this piece for you and what it means to you? Because I shared a little bit with you about what it meant to me when I saw it. But we'd love to hear about your work and specifically this work.
Sure, thank you. So it's important to note that this piece is from 2011, which was a while ago, but I made a, so my work in general is kind of about my experience as an Indian person, as an American person, as an Indian American person. I was, and kind of how all those things navigate and how they don't always coincide and just kind of how they clash and come together. And more recently, I would say my practice in the past few years, my practice has expanded to include a variety of media, from just painting to sculpture to even performance and video. And so these paintings are, they're on my website. I think they technically put them in a subset called migration paintings. They were made in, they were kind of founded in New York City when I was there for a residency, and just kind of being around, really just seeing kind of the way that people from, of course, New York City, how big of a metropolitan it is, and how many people are always around and colliding and passing each other, also reminded me of growing up a little bit in India and going back and forth there in another metropolitan. So I was making these watercolors that were really about diaspora and identity, but also you see kind of ephemeral landscapes where there's abstraction and there's also figuration. So they're purposefully vague and open in that sense. I really aimed to kind of take the viewer on a journey with these like masses of people, so to speak, where the people and cultures kind of, I mean, it's just, to me, it was kind of like passing through time. It's very kind of simple, but I just made a huge series of watercolors for probably, I think, from 2010 to 2015 almost, and I still get asked to do these commissions sometimes. So they're really meditative to me, and they all look pretty different, but I hope that answers the question.
It does. Thank you. I mean, it's a beautiful image, and I saw everything that you've mentioned in it. As I said, to me, it did several things at once. It reminded me of congregations of women in motion that I saw in this. I also saw waves of water and the mountains, landscapes, and the light and the shadow. And as it happens, both images for volume 19 evoke that kind of sea-based, water-based. I'm a Caribbean person myself, so it's always right. I just thought they worked so beautifully together.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of that's so important, and it's important now, and it was important then, and it's going to be important forever, is like just humans connection right now, sometimes lack thereof, to the land, right? To the land and the water, and where so much humanity, spirituality, ritual comes from. And so it's all in there. And before I pop out, I hope to connect with everybody on, I would love to, I'll look people up on, thanks for sending the full list of names out, but my website will show a lot more different works, and it's P, my initial P, and then my last name, rajgaria.com. And so if you're interested, find me and reach out, and I'm excited. Email me. So thank you so much for hosting this, and thanks for letting me talk about my piece a little bit.
Thank you, Frida. We'll put your information in the chat, and we'll also have you on his website in our Solidarities tab so people can find you.
Yes, I can't wait to get my copy. I hadn't gotten the magazine yet, but I can't wait to go through and read.
We just got them yesterday, by the way. So all of you, if you haven't gotten it yet, should be getting it sometime this weekend, because they literally would just ship it out. I know that we have one other of our guests who's going to have to leave soon, so I want to give her a chance to be heard and share her voice with us before she has to leave, and that is TJ. So I'm going to ask the first question that I shared with you earlier, and TJ will give you the first pass at it. So this year's Meridian's 20th anniversary, and we were supposed to have a big blowout of a celebration, which didn't happen for obvious reasons, although we'll be doing it next year. And as I reflect on that history and my own relationship to the journal, first as an author, in fact, it was one of my very first peer review pieces was published in Meridians 20 years ago, then as a reviewer, and now as editor, I'm curious to learn more about your experience of and with Meridians. So TJ, could you get us started in the conversation about why you chose Meridians as a potential home for your work?
Yeah, I would love to talk about that a little bit. First, I just want to say what I see when I see that cover, which relates very closely to my my constant preoccupation as a scholar, which is I see women collectively struggling and demonstrating. And what I'm really interested in all kinds of contexts is what tips people, but specifically women, over into being those agents of change and working collectively towards something. So I really appreciate that, that cover art. To go to your question, actually, that's not a bad segue, because the reasons that I wanted to publish with Meridians, and I only wanted to publish this piece with Meridians. In fact, I sent that piece to Meridians, or some version of it, literally 7 years before it was published, in 2013. And I stuck with the journal, despite not hearing back, for years as the years went on. And then Anne Moody actually died, and I got very upset that the piece wasn't getting out there. But I stuck with the journal because because I believe that Meridians is the journal that I identify, at least, with not just women of color, but with women of color in struggle, and with really wanting to ask the question, what does women of color in struggle, how does it happen? What does it mean? And I think this year, watching multiple generations, but I'm gonna speak as, someone who's on the older edge, watching young women, especially women of color, make such a difference. It's not that it's brand new, but it's always interesting to me when it tips over into such effective organizing. So that's what I'm really interested in. And I know that the journal, from its inception under Paula Giddings, has been the, I identify it as a central mission of the journal. So that's why it was so important to me. And I'm so excited and really proud to be, part of the journal's history.
Thank you, TJ.
And I gotta go.
Yes, thank you for sharing.
Sorry, I only speak and then I don't get a chance to hear everybody else, but I have to go. Thanks very much.
There'll be a recording, so thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Who else would like to answer that question about why Meridians? Why was this a place that seemed like it could offer an appropriate home for your work?
I can respond to that. I really like Meridians.
Meridians like you,
It's a really simplistic response, but I remember that my first published article academic article out of graduate school was actually published in Meridians. And that was sort of, as most of us know, it was a time where you're just insecure and not sure if, I wasn't sure if I'm cut out to be an academic, and I didn't even really know if I was saying something. And I mean, I still hardly know if I'm saying anything, but I mean, I was like, I don't know, I just don't know. And then actually a close friend of mine, who's now a professor as well, said, I think Meridians is a really good, I think Kumkum was at that point one of the editors or something. I don't remember the specifics, but she said, I think Meridians is a good home for the kind of work that both of us do, but not just because of the way feminism, race, transnationalism, and the intersections that it straddles, but it also is a place that sort of offers good feedback and actually helps nurture junior scholars, is what she had told me, that it helps nurture junior scholars. And I found that it's sort of a receptive place. And that was my experience with it, with my first article. And so I was excited to actually, and in the nature of my research, it's also, some of it is based in Pakistan and some of it looks at diaspora. I look at transnational Muslim communities that are not geographically bound to one sort of nation state, and they're racialized differently, and sort of the dynamics of nation state and race and how they shift, like the cover of this this beautiful artwork, and so I feel Meridians often is a place that speaks to the intersections that I straddle. So yeah. That's what I would say.
All right, thank you, Hanum. And actually, I will clarify because you reminded me. Yes, Kumkum Bhavnani, who's a sociologist and is based at UCSB, University of California, Santa Barbara, was our first full-time editor, actually, and she took over the editorship in the spring of 2001. The very first issue of Meridians, which is actually behind me here, was published fall 2000, and it was put together by an editorial collective of faculty from Smith and Wesleyan University, who solicited the first pieces, including my own as a new faculty member here. And then we were fortunate to hire Kumkum, who was editor for 2 years. After Kumkum came Miriam Shansi, who is a Haitian-Canadian scholar, creative writer, poet, etc. And then Paula Giddings became editor for the longest term to date of 11, almost 12 years. And when Paula decided to retire, much to our chagrin, I was fortunate to be asked to try and fill Paula's shoes, which is impossible, but I'm establishing my own by high heels, right? So thank you for reminding me that I should pay honor and homage to those editors. Would somebody else like to say something about why Meridians offers a hospital? I'm curious, maybe from one of our poets. We have several poets with us and performing artists, Rachel and Shana. Why Meridians for you as creative writers?
Shauna, I didn't know if you wanted to take that first. Do you want to talk first?
You can go ahead. That's all right.
Okay. I mean, I really appreciate the fact that I'm an interdisciplinary scholar, so I make images, I write images is kind of how I like to think about it, and I also do qualitative ethnographic work, and it's really refreshing and exciting, not only as a teacher, that I can share Meridians as a resource with my students, and I can say all kinds of work are pathways into ideas about issues. That there's a lot of different ways to look at these things, and all of them offer value. And I think that expansive vision to me was one of the things that I found really wonderful and refreshing. And again, you all do have a really good history of working with authors, which I think is pretty great. And I don't know, I've just always enjoyed that, the journal. And so I felt really honored. Like I literally jumped up and down when I found out you all were going to publish my piece, it was based on like a performance. So it was sort of interesting to say, what happens if this exists just as a piece of writing instead of, a larger piece of art. So, but that's one of the things I loved about the journal, is to be in conversation with all kinds of intellects about different subjects. So.
Thank you, Marie. And I want to hear from Shana, but I want to also point out, Rachel, I appreciate that we asked you to record and to read your piece, which is an elegy, and so it's an extended on the spoken word piece, and we put it on our website. So if you go onto our website and you look on the line and pop down to 19:1, you'll get to hear Rachel reading the elegy for Mary Turner, which is really incredibly powerful. And also we included in the volume some of the woodcut images, the prints that you prepared for that piece. So those are both on the website. We encourage you to look at it because we're trying to always have a multimedia complement, particularly for, but not exclusively for, our creative work. Shana, could you say something about your piece, which includes more languages than one, also includes Hindi, right? So maybe even could you read it for us and tell us why Meridians?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, sure. I mean, would you like me to actually read the poem and then talk about it, or what? Okay. Should I share my screen? Would that be helpful? Okay, because yeah, that might be useful for folks to follow along. So I'll just do that. Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, first I wanted to just say that, I mean, like Rachel, I felt really thrilled to be included in Meridians. And I think, I think this is very new to me to be able to become published in an academic journal. I'm very much at the beginning of my academic career, and so it just really means a lot to me. And the reason I sought out the journal was so much because I'm really interested in the nuances of not just how women of color, but also like genderqueer people of color, non-binary and transgender people of color, which of course can also include women, but like how do we all navigate the really complicated interstices of living in this world? You know, how do we deal with diaspora? How do we deal with loss and grief? And I feel like Meridians really offers that kind of really tough and difficult space. And everything that I'm hearing from all of you today kind of confirms that, because you're all talking about pieces that and just like what I've read and everything, it's just so much about what is complicated, and instead of shying away from that, it really just like, I feel like the journal really just hones in on that. And so for me, that feels really important and is something I was trying to do in my piece, which I can read now. A language outside, a falcon, a phoenix. The winter before last, I finally wrote a letter, grievously in Hindi letters, no transliteration. My architecture laid bare to Poseidon. My feet filthy with their stage, genderqueer and bad grammar. My lover when you were allowed. My dear, you are bilingual. As if a country could be so molded, molten underneath my tongue. The curve after signs, the nerves after coherence. My wild thing is gone, and I hope they never ask me, because मैंने कल 3 घंटे के लिए रोया, as if a drought of beads can be called that. Drenched in no red, we will make our home. My lover, my payal, परसों मैं तुम्हारी कंबल को छोड़ लूंगी. I am still dreaming, stealing you and other. Yeah, that's, yeah. Yeah, I think, one of the things is that I'm not really fluent in Hindi, and I grew up mostly in India, but for various reasons, I've always struggled with Hindi, and I think that one of the challenges for me is figuring out how to do Indian English writing or South Asian English writing, diasporic writing, without romanticizing native languages or native heritage, because I think, like, I see in the Indian context that has a lot of really damaging results. Tradition has become this Hindu nationalist project, and so when I am thinking about languages and culture, I'm trying to figure out how can we move beyond romanticization and instead look at vulnerability. How can we also just challenge some of the weird hegemonic ways that Indian English writers might get more recognized because of privilege, because of access. In my case, because of being able to migrate to the US. I've always been like in between, because I am a US citizen, my mom's American. And so it's this kind of tension of like, what does it mean to hold that and to figure out how to speak not for everyone, but also not for myself as if I know everything, if that makes sense. Or even if I feel like part of exploring language and part of exploring diaspora is kind of having a humility about what we don't know, and what I don't know for myself, what I don't know in terms of what other people are going through, just everything. And also to just really point out the political urgency of like, how do we join together in the face of the way violence, colonialism, war, fascism, fundamentalism, how all of those things collide in countries like India. So yeah, so that was kind of where I was going with it, and I felt like Meridians would be a really helpful place to submit that kind of work to, and it's work that I'm continuing to try to do.
Thank you so much, Shanna, for reading.
Thank you.
A lovely, thoughtful response. You're giving me the opening to say that our next issue of Meridians 20.1 has a focus on East and South Asian feminist writing about East and South Asia, India, Bangladesh, Kashmir, Korea, etc. So, and one of the things we're taking up is the problems of fundamentalisms and nationalisms and xenophobias in those spaces as well. Megan, I'll turn the questions to you.
Absolutely, thank you. So much has happened this year, as we all know, a lot that we could have never predicted. And I find myself going back to some of my personal writings, my poems, my diary entries, and looking at them like I was so naive. And I think something I'm wondering, and I'm really curious about, is if any of you are thinking about your pieces that were in Meridians Volume 19 differently, if there's anything you'd want to expand on or anything that you'd want to change altogether. How have your pieces transformed in your minds in the past year?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. My piece looks at the work of a Dominican performance artist, Rita Indiana. And to answer the first question as well, the reason that I wanted to publish in Meridians is because as someone who writes on the Caribbean is boundless. It's in some ways, it's a figurative space, even as it is also a proper sea with islands. So Rita Indiana, you know, she embodies that. She's lived in Dominican Republic, grew up there, lived in Puerto Rico, lived in the US, all around the US. So anyway, kind of thinking through sort of her work, and in particular, her use of non-binary gender presentation, queer characters, trans characters, to paint a different future for Dominicans. What I did not anticipate is that what Rita Indiana does so well, and what compels me in her work, is that she focuses on what I call negative aesthetics, which are the aesthetics of disorientation, dystopia, and disgust. I could not have predicted that this year would be almost exclusively characterized by disorientation, dystopia, and disgust. So it's quite interesting, because in the moments of this year, I've often felt, another D, despair. And yet in her work, and in this piece, by virtue of me chronicling her work, we sort of have the way out, right? She doesn't shine away from the ugly, the nasty, the painful, the dirty. In fact, she enters through these places to actually create speculative futures that center non-binary and trans people. So I think this is quite interesting for me personally, as a scholar, as a human being, as an activist, to think about the way that we can actually lean into how disgusting this year has been, how disgusted we are at folks being murdered, at the necropolitics of the US government, and to say, in leaning in, we can move through that to imagine liberatory futures, that they don't have to exist as opposites. Either it's bad or it's good. Either I focus on the bad or I envision what a liberatory future might look like. So I feel in some ways so grateful for her work, because I think in some ways she's a prophet. She has told us that through the bad, we can actually work to create futures that center non-normative subjects.
Absolutely, I love that. And it's also been such a year where so many people are speaking about Octavia Butler's work, and just how she too was quite the prophet. And I love the idea that we can look through our disgust and work through our disgust to imagine a better world. It's more honest that way, I think. Would anyone else like to answer? Mari?
Maybe I'll do the same. I want to say something first about why publishing in Meridians, and maybe I'll position myself as a diasporic Viequense, and this is what the community that I write about. And so to me, something that it's always on my mind, that I find such a big responsibility, is how to write about my own community, which is a very vulnerable one. and who I want to be sharing these stories with, right? So thinking about my work, not just as an academic that needs to publish and get it in some sort of, you know, space that is widely read, but not to commodify my own work. And I was very happy to be published with, to publish this article with Meridians, because it's the kind of journal that I respect, right? That opens a space for women of color, that devotes serious attention to issues that I care about, and that is not just about the space that it's creating. So it's also about the people that I'm sharing the story that I want to tell with. So that's important to me. So in terms of why, how is it potentially more urgent? So my article is about the Viequense community and how it has been impacted by militarized colonialism, and how basically survival in this island community, it has never been guaranteed, and how vulnerability is a part of being a Viequense. So the last year has, I mean, the fiscal crisis, Hurricane Maria has brought so many things, such, you know, it makes it so real, so visible for people who are willing to see. But then the pandemic obviously just, it makes it more urgent that people who have been occupied for over 60 years by the US Navy, bombed for decades, don't have a working hospital, right? So this is a demand that has been going on for decades, and it's a renewed urgency now to say, okay, all these things, we have a health crisis here, we have a pandemic, right? So we need a working hospital for this community, and people are voicing it, and it's just, yeah, it has taken more urgency in this last year.
Absolutely. Oh, yes, Laura.
So I actually started thinking about changes or modifications that could be made prior to this year, since I submitted my piece a handful of years ago. And one thing that really struck me as something that really related to my piece was the Me Too movement. And the violence against women, the sexual violence against women, and how this has disproportionately affected women of color. And so my piece, you know, delves into the sexual violence that is portrayed in Sandra Cisneros' The House on Mango Street. And specifically, I look at the book as a collection of stories that engages with the fairy tale genre. So kind of look at it almost as a type of revisionist understanding of fairy tales, and how it simultaneously engages with the fairy tale genre while also challenging the really problematic premises and promises of such fairy tales, and how the types of opportunities, if you will, that fairy tales, especially like Disney-fied fairy tales, right, make available to women are ones that aren't, opportunities that aren't really available to women of color, especially working class women of color. And so, but at the same time, these fairy tales are so pervasive that the characters can't really escape them, right? And so I delve into questions of sexual harassment that the young female characters face. Uh-oh, my screen is frozen. I don't know if you all can hear me or not.
Yep.
Okay. Chances are the computer will freeze in just a moment. So basically, sorry, I just lost my train of thought as I saw the frozen screen on my end. But yeah, so I look at questions of sexual harassment that the young women face, intimate partner violence that is really prevalent in this Chicago community, and issues of domestic abuse, and also sexual violence that that these young girls face. And so that definitely resonates with the Me Too movement. And so I thought that, you know, as that really, you know, was brought to, not that these issues haven't always existed, but as these issues really came to come to a head in the national spotlight, I thought that that would be something that would be worth kind of tying my analysis of the house on Mango Street into those larger national dynamics that affect women, and especially women of color. And also in terms of this year, right, how, you know, communities of color are disproportionately affected and particularly vulnerable to getting COVID. And so, you know, looking at the specific vulnerabilities that these communities face. And so kind of going back to the first question about why meridians, I don't know, I like so many other people, it was just, I knew that it had to be published in Meridians. I didn't even imagine a different journal. I couldn't even imagine a different journal because the journal so focuses on questions of intersectionality, and my work really emphasizes questions of intersectionality, interdisciplinarity, and questions of women of color feminism. And that's really what I grapple with in my piece.
Thank you, Laura.
Thanks. I'm going to turn off my computer and come back in so I can actually see people.
Okay, all right. Well, so since we circled back to Meridians itself, our next question is, keeping our central themes in mind of feminism, race, and transnationalism, what would you identify as broader political wins and losses this year in terms of feminism, race, and transnationalism?
I would love to answer that one.
Right at you, Leanne. You saw me looking at you, right?
I didn't. Responded to the energy.
That's right.
Well, when I thought about this question, well, the time I had to think about it, I thought about this question, and it's some of the wins are losses, right? So, okay, huge losses, the pandemic, 240,000 plus dead in this country alone, and people that have, and really, I heard someone, an activist, call 45, I don't even want to say his name, call him a mass murderer, and that's exactly what he is. But all those people dead here, all that grief, all that loss, so many sick, and then all the folks that are dead all around the world and that will die, because this administration is not doing everything it can to stop the illness from spreading. So that's a major loss. Biden's victory, right? Biden, that's a win and a loss. I mean, I would have loved to have seen Stacey Abrams or Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders, right? So it's a win that we don't have to deal with. I don't know if it can get worse than 45, right? We don't have him in 2 months, but what is a Biden-Harris administration going to bring for us? All right, so there's a promise to restore the few rights that trans people gain under Obama on an official level. There's a promise to protect DACA and restore, make the country open to immigrants and refugees the way it was under Obama. And Obama did incredible damage to immigrants as well. There is, I mean, we have somebody that's not explicitly a misogynist, right, and doesn't brag about sexual assault, but he is accused of sexual assault. I believe her, right? So, I mean, is that a win or a loss for us? And we also have someone that certainly isn't encouraging white supremacists and celebrating the deaths of the murders of Black and brown people, but he has used the rhetoric of law and order, and he has dismissed calls to defund the police, and will align himself with the rhetoric of white supremacy as it concerns the carceral state if he believes it will serve him. I mean, is a centrist going to give us what we want? No, but he won't be as bad as the person that's in office now. So, I mean, the emotions are so mixed, right? When there's a relief, and then there's still so much grief. I mean, personally, that I felt, and that the people that I love and that are politically attuned felt. And just before, and I want to, Sotomayor, yes, right? We want more Sotomayors, and we get Amy Coney Barrett, who replaced Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who's celebrated as some huge feminist and some major feminist, and she's just not, right? She did a lot for, I mean, in my opinion, white, straight, cisgender women who have economic privilege, but she also did a lot to promote a neoliberal, neo-imperial project here in the Straits. But the last thing I would say is, going back to your first question about Meridians and what it means to be a part of the Meridians family now, as a family of scholars and artists, I was so thrilled to have my piece accepted. It means so much to me, precisely because it's a space devoted to women of color feminisms and devoted to women of color, not trans and non-binary people of color, and people at the intersections of those identities, and emphasizing our voices. I see Meridians as the offspring of not just struggle, but resistance, and evidence that, I mean, I'm so tired, and I'm sure I'm not the only one that's tired, that while we're struggling, yes, we're surviving, we are also thriving in the ways that we can. And that no matter how powerful the institutions and individual forces out there, how powerful these structures and systems are, and no matter what they do to try to silence us, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. And I also really love that Meridians doesn't just place a premium and a spotlight on the voices of scholars in the traditional sense, visual artists and poets. It means so much to me, and activist scholars means so much to me to be in community, in intellectual community and creative community with folks that are making art, and making art that is intellectual, and those of us who try to be a little artistic about the intellectual stuff that we make. So yeah, Meridians is awesome. Thanks.
Thank you, Leanne. Yeah, you're reminding me that I should say that is our central mission, is that we think about women of color knowledge production in all its forms, right? In every form, from creative writing, from poetry, visual, the performative, as well as the more traditional and conventional scholarly form of knowledge production, and that we see them as nurturing one another, right, and feeding one another. Somebody else like to answer that question about wins and losses from your perspective? And around these questions of feminism, race, transnationalism?
I'd love to say something, and then I have to take off for another meeting. I think, I think one of the gains is just the profound, resilience of people taking to the streets around George Floyd's murder and some of the other murders of Black people in the United States during a pandemic. I think has had profound effects transnationally. And I say this because I have a million WhatsApp groups, and family groups, right? Like, so every morning there's all kinds of stuff from Pakistan that arrives. But I think I was struck by, the ways in which anti-Black racism in the United States with the circulation of social media and videos of violence, of police brutality and violence have gone sort of like circulated transnationally. And the kind of commentary I heard from sort of people in Pakistan who normally would not sort of be attuned to or thinking about anti-Black racism, actually. But I think that the ways in which people, you know, the sheer level of violence, but also the ways in which the movements that have taken on these issues have organized and people take to the streets in pandemics, and the circulation of those images and videos of murder, you know, I think there's something that's also happened transnationally in terms of understanding anti-Black racism, particularly as it manifests in the United States in ways that wasn't there, I think. I don't know how deep, you know, that, you know, how deep the sort of impacts of that are, or because it's so often that, you know, progressive politics are just sort of appropriated, you know, and emptied out of deep meaning and deeper engagement. But I do feel that something has happened to engage the world in knowledge about the way the U.S. has built itself on foundations of violence. So I think again is that in, you know, in so many just sort of whatever, like gentrified neighborhoods in Los Angeles where it's mostly sort of white hipstery kind of, you know, feel to it, like just Black Lives Matter posters are everywhere. That there's murals of Audre Lorde on just random, not progressive coffee shops, you know. That Angela Davis is, I mean, it trips me out. Like, I'm just like, that's Audre Lorde. It's quotes by Audre Lorde on just sort of a regular street. Like, this is incredible, you know, and the language that we use. I mean, I also thought, not to sort of just give us so much credit or, you know, but I think also the languages that we use in classrooms, in GWS classrooms, is on CNN. You know, there's a way in which this language has kind of circulated, and where it never was. I mean, nobody said women of color except for in class, you know what I mean? But CNN anchors and whatever and everything, you know. So I do think that there's something, there's a gain, and we don't really know yet sort of what it means deeply, but I think there's something beyond the United States in that way, in the circulation of thinking about anti-Black violence globally. And I'm excited about that. I'm hopeful. There's been a lot of losses in terms of also the rise in fundamentalism and nationalism all around the world. The occupation, the blatant occupation of Kashmir that has just sort of fallen through the cracks entirely, and other things, you know, but yeah, I just wanted to say that. And I'm so happy. I'm so happy that, I don't know if this is something you do, but I'm so glad that, because sometimes every time a journal comes out, one just looks at the table of contents, doesn't know who these folks are, and then just moves on in life. So I'm so happy to see all these folks here. And I'm sorry I have to run because I have a meeting, but thank you for hosting this.
Thank you for joining us. We'll send you the information about 20.1, which, as I said, does talk about Kashmir and occupation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Maybe do you want to ask the next question?
Yeah, absolutely. I think kind of leaving us on a really wonderful note, and I guess a segue, just thinking about how does, if it does, protest and activism play a role in your work as scholars and writers and artists, and if it hasn't, how might it now in the future, or in the present rather?
Vanessa, Cali, Lucia, Maria.
I'd like to, could you ask again, please? It was very, I couldn't hear the first part.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was saying in terms of thinking about activism and protest, and what Pino was saying just about global protest and during a pandemic, what role will activism and protest play in your work if it doesn't already? And also wondering what role can Meridians play in your work and in activism and in protest?
I forgot to say that I'm an associate professor at Florida Atlantic University teaching measurement and research methods. So this piece, which was a collaboration with my colleagues, why we chose Meridian was because of what Meridian is, because of the type of spaces that Meridian provides to the voices, to the people, to the individuals, to the different dimensions of scholarly work. Now, regarding your question of activism, that's an interesting question. Earlier today, I was talking to another colleague in North Dakota and talking about what's going on right now in the United States and also in other countries. Part of the, I'm not surprised, but a big gain that I have noticed, and that's part of what I also talk sometimes in class, is the role of youth. Protesting, the role of youth speaking up, the role of youth saying, talking to adults what they want, what they need. I think I have not witnessed that before so deeply. Back home in my native country, and that was part of my earlier conversation, we grew up not really saying things, not because we were not allowed, but because we grew up in a military government where there were a lot of limitations, and that's who we were. I mean, that was not part that was not protesting and speaking up was not really encouraged at all. Sadly, we moved to a terrorism age in South America. So from enjoying a little bit of freedom, then we moved to terror, right? Growing up in terror and going to college with all these fears. And then here in the States, now what I see is youth protesting. Now I see extremely smart young people saying things that I am just amazed to hear, and I'm so grateful that they can say it with freedom. That goes, if you have not experienced limitations, if you have not experienced closed doors, then I don't think one can be so appreciative of that. So I shared that with my students, and as we talk about possible research problems, I talk about, look, there are different ways to tell stories. And it's only when we are able to reflect on who we are and we have lived and we experience. It's only when we are able to tell our story is that we have the ability to make an impact. So that's how I would relate activism into what I do in my classes.
Absolutely, that makes me, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry, I wanted to thank you. I do need to run in a couple of minutes, but thank you very much for including me.
Thank you for joining us. That makes me think of our interns, honestly, and I'm sure some might be here tonight. And you've worked with them more than I have because I've only been here a month. But they're they are young people and they are actually very passionate and they feel very deeply about everything that's happening, and it's wonderful to speak with them, I think. Does anyone else want to chime in?
I was just gonna go off of that, and I think I've had the privilege of being part of Meridians before I worked at Meridians like the days before I even had a class at Smith, and so my image of what academia could be was always rooted in activism and the knowledge production in all these different forms that Meridians has, and so getting to see all my coworkers, all my interns and the editors, editorial assistants, everybody doing really incredible activist work and having passions in all different arenas. So getting to see that and see that, this knowledge that was being created and shared didn't have to be separate. And the things I was learning in class didn't have to be separate from the things I cared about and the things that I was watching in the world, which was my perception growing up. And so I think that was such an incredible gift that Meridians has given. And as I continue to finish up my, academics at Smith and go into the world, I'm excited to take those things I've learned.
Thank you so much, Kelly.
Vanessa, were you going to say something about that question?
Sure, I can respond to that, building on some of the other folks' comments. I was just kind of thinking about in my own teaching and community engaged scholarship, the kind of ways that we think about activism and communities and these traditional kind of boundaries between the academy and communities is being really rooted in these imperial and modernist ideas around knowledge and knowledge production, who are knowledge producers. And even in teaching my Latina feminist theory class, we think about and really kind of center these ideas and these kind of critical understandings around epistemology and knowledge. And that's one of the things I appreciate and that about Meridians, and why I wanted to publish in Meridians as well, is that it really disrupts these, again, what we think about as being traditional notions around knowledge, what is knowledge, and who can be producers of knowledge. And in teaching and research, I think it's so important to kind of center these critiques and try to disrupt these ideas around knowledge production, because we become so limited, and as kind of Christy had said at the beginning, around what the possibilities are and kind of the real roots of transformation, and allow us to think about the fact that, you know, we're really standing on the shoulders of giants, feminist and women of color giants, who have long been doing this work in the many communities where we're situated.
Thank you, Vanessa. That leads us to a question that Megan and I were trying to think about. How do we ask about this question of historicity and archiving and so forth? So I'm going to ask a really old school kind of 80s kind of question, which is, if we were putting together, Megan and I, a Meridians time capsule for this year, right? That's going to be dug up at the 40th anniversary of Meridians. What would you put in it? What should go in that time capsule?
Gineta, I would stuff everything in. I think that you know, part of the conversation that's being had is that what makes Meridian amazing is that there are so many different voices, that there are so many different points of view, that there's a space for nurturing young academics. I mean, my first piece in Meridians was in 2004, so I have a very long relationship to Meridians. And I also, when I teach, I teach a Latina feminist class, and we have a direct link to Meridians. And one of the assignments is, you know, choose, and I don't tell them which one, I say choose an article. And so my students have to look through and figure out which one is meaningful to them. And in that case, if you had a time capsule and left anyone out, it would be sort of almost counterproductive to the goal and the objectives of Meridians. It's about inclusivity of not only academic voices, but creative voices and activist voices. And I think that when I was writing little notes here, and you know, the theme has been activism, and I don't translate anymore, but I made this exception of translating for Meridians, because it's Meridians, because it's you, and because it's Cuba, because it's including this voice of, and for me, I was thinking activism as persistence. And persistence is this continual presence, this continual pushback, and which is something that Meridians does in a both scholarly and creative way. So if you had a time capsule, you better put it in a zip drive and fit it all in, because I think, I think that that's the only way it could honor Meridians and all of these voices and the project of what Meridians engages in. Activism through persistence, creativity through open doors, and conversations that are not the easy ones, right? And putting out there, you know, the fact that this is the first, that the first translation, or the only translation for the petition against gender violence, comes out in Meridians is huge, because on some levels, Cuba is, you know, of course, in academia, a site of study, but it's also for the general public, it's an embargoed space of intellectual engagement, right? So I would say figure out how to put everything into the time capsule.
Great, thank you, Lucia.
Shifting away from Meridians a little bit, I'm curious about how you all are archiving this year. I know that I've taken more photos, I've written random things down that I may not have written down before, just to save, just to honor this year, to honor the emotions that have I've gone through this year with this pandemic and the protests, and I'm curious what your archiving practices have been, if they have been, and if you found it difficult to kind of document this year.
No, I'm living with 3 roommates that are also Smith students, and we have a journal that we keep in our room and our like dining room table, and we put cartoons, we draw cartoons of our dreams, and we write comments when we're thinking about the election, and we write back and forth about our readings that we're doing in classes, and then we're going to donate to Smith Archives at the end. So we're just trying to kind of keep together all the memories that we're sharing here.
I like that it's a collective journal. That's a wonderful idea.
Yeah.
So archiving is so important. That is an understatement. I am a historian, so it's really important. And also my honest response to your question was, I cannot wait to not even have to think about any of this this time again. Right? I just trying to get through it. So I haven't been documenting on purpose anything. And perhaps I'll regret that, but for example, I'm in a fishbowl with my like I'm really getting to know my kids and they really are getting to know me, you know, we're very close. So I can't imagine forgetting just how hard this was. It's hard. And so I've managed to create and with the help of loved ones, spaces that aren't so hard, you know, that feel good. And I'm reading Octavia Butler. I didn't read anything for fun before I got tenure. And Octavia Butler wrote this moment. That's terrifying. But not archiving a damn thing. So that's but my response. Yeah.
Anyone else? Shauna.
Hi. Yeah, I relate a lot. I mean, I don't have kids, but and that sounds so incredibly challenging in so many ways. I can't even imagine. But you know, I think that like I'm usually the kind of person who's like always saving and writing little things and drawing little things and like, you know, just kind of combining everything that I'm creating and academically, I mean, trying to synthesize it all, I guess. And I have been doing some of that this year, but I have found it incredibly challenging. And I just feel like more than anything, I'm trying to give myself like the space to be really upset and angry and in some ways traumatized really by just how horrible this year has been and continues to be. And I think that's hard because, you know, like when I'm teaching, I'm always trying to tell my students, you know, I hope you're doing okay. I hope you're managing somehow, even though everything is terrible. You know, it's just like this constant, like trying desperately to help them feel at least a little bit better. But then every now and then I say something like, it's also okay if you're just not feeling good. And you know, and so I feel like it's this very delicate and weird balance of trying to both hold what is, you know, messy and fraught and horrible. And that's like, yeah, it's not just, I mean, the pandemic is a huge part of it, but so is, yeah, the police brutality, the racist, fascist, you know, state and how things are getting worse, but hopefully won't keep getting worse. I don't know. And you know, like I think it's just really challenging because it's this grief and loss and pain, and then it's also trying desperately to find these moments of survival or talking to friends, talking to anyone really, about moments that of hope or what we'll do when things are a little better. I don't know. So archiving is complicated right now, I guess, is what I wanted to say. Yeah.
It's certainly very complicated, and I appreciate you bringing up survival because I think that's just what a lot of us have been trying to do, and it's certainly difficult to archive and document when you're mostly just trying to not get a virus or be assaulted. So yeah, I feel the complicated nature of it all.
Well, you've all been incredibly generous in your responses. So Megan and I wanted to open ourselves up to any questions that you might have for us, whether it's about Meridians and this space here, the work we're doing, or any questions at all that we could answer for you.
I'll also add, since we're sort of short on time, if anyone in the audience has questions, you can pop them into the chat and we'll read them out loud for any of our contributors or for Janetta and myself. Yes.
I have one quick question, and it's kind of, I don't know if it's a great question to ask or not, but, I was thinking about access, and I work with, folks who are incarcerated. And, one of the things I think as activists that's really important is to really, how do you reach people who don't have access to the internet, who don't have access to subscriptions, who can't, get some of these things. And so I always think about, is there a possibility for open access for some parts of, the work we're doing, the work you're doing at Meridians? I think the writing that's present in that journal is so important. And so I wonder if there's, if there's ways to get past, the academic firewalls that I think so many of these journals put up. And so I'm just curious about that. Is there any possibility for, open access for archives in the past or some things like that?
That's a great question, Rachel. I'm really glad that you asked it. So I have a couple of answers for it. One is that we're really fortunate to have Duke University Press as our publisher. And specifically, they have a developing countries initiative that we have already been able to make use of, specifically with our volume on African feminist cartographies. One of the contributors was my former classmate and best friend from Smith, Wambui Mwangi, who's a political scientist in Kenya. And as she's been doing for 35 years, she promptly, stop, Janetta. It's lovely that you're doing an African feminist cartographies issue. How are women in Africa going to access it when we don't have project use and we don't have university affiliations necessarily, and so on and so forth? And it's, of course, you're absolutely right. I went to the press said, that's absolutely correct. We're going to open access to this issue for the next 6 months for free, no paywall, specifically for the African feminist cartographies issue. And it is one of the most downloaded issues, not only in Meridian's history, but I think in the journal's side of DUP's history. Thousands of times the entire issue was downloaded, and we can tell that it was largely from Africa and the global South, which was really wonderful for us. And being a Dominican scholar myself, I know that means that once it was downloaded in PDF, photocopies are circulating, all over the continent, I hope. And we just had that same conversation with DUP about this forthcoming South Asian feminisms issue, which is primarily, almost exclusively with 1 or 2 exceptions, about countries in South Asia, right? So it's not just South Asian scholars, say, who are in the US writing about South Asia, but it's South Asian feminist scholars writing from and about South Asian countries. So we want to make sure that those articles, that issue, is available there, right? So again, the Developing Countries Initiative has already promised that issue will be open access for an extended period of time. So just at the level of like the formal mechanism, we have that. We also use our website in this way, the Meridian specific website that's hosted through Smith, where through our on-the-line solidarities and so forth, we have made sure to, and this is why we do the links, we want to make sure that things like Joyce Follay's piece on Making Democracy Real, which is a 100-year documentary history of Black women's participation and actually initiation of the reproductive justice movement in the US, dating back to the World War I period, where if you go on the website, you'll see that the 100+ primary documents that she uses to narrate that story are clickable, so that you can access not only the article, but the sources that the article is based on, and that the blog is actually a resource for RJ activists throughout the US, right? So So we're really trying to use our personal website also so that people can enter it who are not coming in from academic spaces, right, and find out about meridians. The third thing that we've done is that I have shipped boxes of the entire collection of meridians to, for example, Women's College in Pakistan. I wish Hani was here for that, because they wrote me an email and said, we found out about meridians, we can't get to the paywall, can you send us a copy? I said, absolutely, and I shipped the box, right? And I'm willing to do that time and again, and I have a little story to tell about this archive. When we moved to this space from where meridians used to be in another building on campus, the then provost, who is now gone and someone else's problem, wanted me specifically to destroy, to send to pulping the meridians issues that we had in boxes in a storage space. And I, for a hot minute, was going to argue the point with her. And then I thought, I don't need to argue. I'll just do what Dominicans do. I'll just do what I want, which is that I will take these boxes and I will hold on to them. And when we get our space set up, actually Leslie and I practically stole shelves, and then we unbox them, right? And this is our archive, our repository, and we ship out collections of the 20 years so that people, particularly again in the global south or in institutions that are not resourced the way Smith is, for example, can have the journal. I'm fully committed to the material object as well. I mean, I think online is amazing. I think we need to have that. I think it plays a really important democratizing role. But as a bibliophile, and there's a Japanese word for people who collect books just because we're obsessed. That's not bibliophile. I'm one of those. I think the actual journal itself, I want to say flesh and blood, but the paper and print and the smell and the image, that all of that makes those of us who are nerdy girls really happy, right? And our nerdy allies. So all of it just to say, Rachel, that we are both working with our formal publishers and partners, but we're also willing to be creative about the ways that we make sure that anybody who wants anything from Meridians can get it, because that's our major goal, right? Is that Meridians has to live in the world, not just here in these spaces, that it has to be out there, and that you have to be out there, right? That your work, your voices have to be out there, and that this cacophony, right? The symphony that we are. And actually, I have to tell a story real quick. I know we're almost at time, but when Megan was interviewing for this job, and by the way, she had fierce competition. There were over 120 people who applied for this job, right? One of the things that Megan said that just, among the many things that she said that wowed everybody, was that you cited Audre Lorde and the film about her, and about how the work is, what was this?
On the edge of each other's battles.
Do you want to say more about that?
Sure. There's an Audre Lorde documentary about a convention that was held for her and in her honor just a few years before she passed. And it was for women of color. There were, for women of color, for non-binary people, and there are a few men there as well. And she spoke about how we need to know what each other are going through. And we need to be well educated on each other, because we are just on the edge of each other's battles. And at any moment we could go over and be in the same boat as someone else. And when, in the context of our interview, I was just saying that is what drew me to Meridians. The fact that like many of you have stated, Meridians is having really difficult conversations, and they mirror each other so closely sometimes, and sometimes they don't, but they're important conversations to have, and they're not easy, but I love the challenge of Meridians. Yeah.
I think we have a few more minutes if there's any more questions or questions from our audience participants.
So I have a question kind of piggybacking on the question of access to the journal. And I guess it's a question about access in a slightly different way. And obviously I too am a bibliophile, as someone who focuses on literature. But as so many people have said, in terms of the appeal of Meridians is its disciplinarity, it's transdisciplinarity, in terms of not just looking at academic pieces or quote unquote scholarly pieces, because we realize like scholarship comes in so many different forms, but also looking at visual art and poetry and like personal essays. I guess I'm wondering if you're envisioning a space that would allow for, I guess, a combo of the hard copy of the journal and also kind of expanding opportunities for other people who don't just identify as artists of some sort to speak their truths, or so maybe having, like, especially since, this is the first kind of Zoom type chat, maybe having opportunities to reach out to the larger population, especially thinking about everything that people have gone through over the course of the past handful of years. I mean, obviously forever, but especially given everything that's happened in the past handful of years, so that maybe there could be kind of a joint, not only, hard copy of the journal and also this media presence, but also a media presence that would allow for contributors to the journal to also, have these types of conversations with people who might not have ever thought of writing something for the journal or creating a visual art piece for the journal.
Yeah, so the answer is yes. We have been talking, for a while I've been talking, and now with Megan here, it's a conversation that we can take further because, young energy as opposed to elder energy, about how we would do that, whether that would be in the form of a blog. So like there's the Chicana blog, the Mujeres, what is it called? Mujeres Hablando. I'm trying to remember the name of it. So maybe some of you know which one it is from, used to be in Ohio.
MALCS, Mujeres Activas en Letras y Cambio Social.
It's not that one. It's another one that was in Ohio. But in any case, a blog that is more about kind of online publishing as opposed to, or as a complement to Meridians, right? So yeah, we have been talking about it. We are, I hope, able to move in that direction at some point, for sure. And I do want to make sure I plug before I forget, because you're all educators as well, that are the third issue of Volume 19. Is the 20th anniversary reader of Meridians that we've been working on for over a year, and that I finished in the midst of the pandemic and the summer months of turmoil. I love the way you put it, Leanne, by the way, of relief and grief. I think that just captured it beautifully. And it is a 545-page collection of 30 selections from 20 years of Meridians issues, featuring over 40 contributors, ranging from internationally renowned folks like Angela Davis and Sarah Ahmed, to younger, lesser known perhaps scholars whose work has been impactful on their fields and has been highly cited and downloaded and so forth. It includes poetry, Nikki Finney, Lorianne Guerrero, Miriam Shansi, visual art, and memoir, testimonio, reports from the field, interviews, and so forth. And I truly feel in my heart of hearts and in my gut that it will be an invaluable contribution to the classroom, that it is really an incredible reader. And it is the third issue of the volume that you are in. And I think that is one of the ways that I was hoping to also make Meridians more visible out in the world as a text for classroom adoption. So I really want all of you to know about it. I will send you your copies so that you have it. I'll make sure that you get your desk copies, and that maybe that's another way, right, that we can introduce Meridians, especially to our students, right, to our undergraduates, and graduate students, right, and on social media. Well, for once, despite being a Dominican Latina, we might do something on time and wrap almost precisely at 5:30. But before we do, I just want to say thank you again for contributing your work to Meridians, for making the time to be there today, for your generous and really thoughtful and engaging answers. You're all brilliant. Just everything you said moved me. I really felt it.
No, absolutely. I feel the same way. This was very, I think we didn't know what today was going to be, and the online virtual space can be really tricky sometimes, but this truly did feel like a community gathering, and I'm so lucky to have been a part of it.
And thank you all. Next time we'll have champagne. Thank you again. We will send you the information that you need and that we've talked about today, and hope that we get to do this again.
Good night, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks,
so much.
everybody. Bye.
Thank you. It's nice meeting all of you.
Yeah.
Nice meeting you guys. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
Let's stay
Yeah,
connected.
Your kids, by the way, that was fantastic. Seeing your kids dash down.
Oh, that was fantastic for you because
For me, it was great.
No, many of us, some of us do have children.
but they're not running around and they're also yelling like
It's all
and
good.
I'm trying not to.
It's
I'm
part
like,
of the persistence. It's part of the persistence. It's all good.
My son would not have survived COVID, okay? I tell people that. My son would not have survived it, okay? Like, it just wouldn't have happened.
oh, the twins are going to survive? I don't know. Please. Anyway, thank you for being cool.
Bye-bye. Laura, encantada.
Thank you, Piper. Bye, everybody.